Hi, Alfie.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So it's a great honor to talk to you today, and we'll be discussing your new book, Post Comedy, which I find excellent. And maybe I will also try to persuade you to be more negative, or maybe it will go wrong. I don't
Yeah.
know. Would you
Well,
like
yeah.
to introduce yourself? Because I think that you're too modest. You never. How many books do you have in the position? Or maybe
Well, no,
everyone else is not modest enough.
I've got a new position. So now I'm senior lecturer in digital media at King's College in London, which is a new job, which is really great. And yeah, I mean, I did my PhD on comedy and history of theorizing and thinking about comedy, especially psychoanalysis, but also in general, just the history of philosophizing comedy. And then I did like two or three books on like digital media and psychoanalysis. And so this book, which is a short book called Post Comedy, which comes out in November, is like going back to the first topic of my PhD, which is like theories and philosophy of comedy. Um, but yeah, whereas the PhD was about like the whole history of thinking about comedy in a very academic sense, this book is a really short and more public facing book about comedy today and laughter today in the age of the culture wars and kind of what's happened to comedy. Can we take a joke anymore and what's happening with comedy right now in society today? So it was kind of fun to write and I think an interesting and important topic as well.
This one is more fun than the previous book on comedy. It kind of introduction to your more serious book, but it's
Yeah.
actually fun to read. So if
Yeah.
you want to summarize it, what is happening with comedy today and what
Yeah.
is this world of post comedy looks like?
Yeah, cool. So I mean, I guess there's two sort of two reasons this book came about. And one answer is like, yeah, as you say, to think about, I just sort of felt that I noticed something changing with comedy, even in my lifetime. So I'm 36 now, so I probably as an adult have only been engaging properly with comedy for like 20 years as a consumer of it. But I feel like the last 5 or 10 years, especially the last 5 years, have uh, marked a certain change. I got this from there's one summer, 1 year ago maybe or two, where I the Oscars happened. You know the famous Oscars where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock or on stage or
Mhm.
whatever for making the wrong kind of joke about his wife. And I think this was a really interesting moment because it sort of showed that these were both, roasting and ribbing and piss taking. Actually, the Oscars is famous for it, and Ricky Gervais and other comedians have said very much more edgy, serious, harsh comedy in the past, and not been seen as a point of tension. So I felt that this embodied a change in the nature of comedy and saying how society is extremely anxious about comedy now. And alongside that, we've got the cancellation of people like Dave Chappelle, criticism of people like Ricky Gervais, and so on. So in the last few years, you see this kind of real flare up of tension around in comedy. And then it was actually the Slovene psychoanalytic writer Jela Krecic. She suggested to me that the way to explain this was to think about a change from Freud's comedy to a kind of capitalist comedy. And I think that this was a really, she hasn't actually written about this, was just like something she mentioned to me. But she basically said that, for Freud, comedy was about relief, but today comedy is about tension. So my kind of question was like, what the hell has happened? If you follow Freud, there's actually like 200 years or more of comedy operating as a relief of tension. So what happens in the last 5 or 10 years where this starts kind of rolling back or getting threatened and comedy starts being a point of tension rather than a kind of release of tension? So that was my kind of like start into thinking about what's happening with comedy.
Great, thank you, Alfie. And also, you write that it resists capitalism. It has this power to resist capitalism. And what do you mean?
Yeah, so this is the other strand of my thinking. And so in my PhD, I tried to create a theory of comedy, which I kind of articulated in different ways. like what the when I did the book, published the book, I called it Laughter as Event, like a kind of event, a mini event in the kind of Alain Badiou sense. But another way of putting it would be this kind of theory of laughter as retroactivity or laughter as Nachtraglichkeit or something. So this was my theory of comedy is that true laughter, and I don't know if I want to say true laughter, but real laughter, not faked laughter, um, but real laughter operates as a moment of retroactivity or a moment of events or a moment of Nachtraglichkeit. And what I mean by that is that it's like quite a transformative moment, which kind of reinscribes or transforms the relationship between subject and object, or past and present, or anything like that. So when we truly laugh at something, we're operating in a transitional moment, which can really construct, reconstruct, break down, rewrite history, subjectivity, identity, or whatever. So you can think of like some kind of obvious examples of that would be things like jokes about nationality or racist jokes or whatever, where when you start sort of looking beneath the surface, you can sort of see that you wouldn't really have, for example, like a sort of soft, uncontroversial, maybe example would be like the relationship between British and French people. British and French people really like to joke about each other and stuff. And you can see that there's a long history of this, and that joking about national identity is also part of the production of national identity. We can't really say which came first, because once you find it funny, it appears to have existed and it sort of appears to have be like the subject of the joke. But of course, it's not quite so, because if we took away all the jokes about English people or French people, then those things wouldn't have the same meaning as they do. So I think we can sort of see in a easy way that jokes do at least sometimes have this kind of power to retroactively change things. And this this is different to like a whole history of theorizing laughter, I suppose, because jokes and laughter, they're usually discussed in terms of like cause and effect. So laughter is always thought of as like a response to something, so that a joke is made or something funny happens, and then laughter is a response to the thing, to the stimulus. That's the thing. And I wanted to explore more how it's maybe politically, if you want to call it that, more important to think about laughter as a cause, or maybe as something which deals with cause and effect in a more complicated way than simply why did we find that funny? If you say, yeah, if you mention a joke, whatever, people start philosophizing on the first thing they want to do is explain why it's funny. And my view is that actually the first question should be more like, what is that laughter doing? What is almost the effect or after effect, or what kind of construction of time and identity and space and subjectivity is being produced by the act of laughter. So I kind of wanted to think differently to like quite a big history of people theorizing laughter. Um, to eventually kind of come around to your question, what I wanted to do was test whether this theory of laughter as event, or laughter as Nachtraglichkeit, or laughter as retroactivity would operate in today's world. So your question at the end, you said, how are we living in a sort of post-comedy world? And my sort of feeling, which I tried to explore a little bit in the book, is that I think we're losing this retroactive power of laughter that has had a really long history. And of course, laughter and comedy, everyone who's listening to this will have their own examples where it's obvious, whether it's political caricature, whether it's satire, whether it's television, whether it's film, whether it's Chaplin, where comedy plays a sort of important role in reforming society. And I think that goes right down to the playground. My daughter is nearly 9 years old, and the role that jokes and laughter play in school is part of the testing of identity and play, and the forming of subjectivities and growing up and so on. So, but what I think you're seeing today is the shutting off of this retroactive power of laughter, and that is the true and important power that comedy and laughter have. And what you're seeing instead is maybe a different kind of laughter, which I guess I would call like didactic laughter, or maybe even forced or performed laughter, where you're laughing at things you already agree with. So the joke is not changing. the world that you're in. So, for example, a great example of this would be the two comedians, Ricky Gervais and James Acaster. They were in 2022, they were the top two comedians on Netflix. So they were the most watched comedians on Netflix. And Ricky Gervais makes a lot of jokes about trans people. I don't think they're as funny as other people's jokes about trans people. They're quite bad jokes. And James Acaster, he makes jokes about fascists, and he accuses Ricky Gervais of being a fascist, anti-trans. And so they're on two sides of the coin on this cultural debate, but they both make the same kind of humor, in my opinion, which is a joke where you're supposed to laugh because you agree with it. So we're developing a kind of didactic forced laughter where whichever side of the political spectrum you are, whatever your views, what you think you're finding funny, what you're laughing at is things you agree with. So you get the people who are like free speech activists or whatever, maybe some trans folk, and then on the other side you get people laughing because, oh, look at these stupid TERFs thinking all this, how stupid they are. We have those are the wrong guys. So even when you've got two apparently opposite examples, the structure of the laughter is the same. And I would put this laughter in the category of didactic laughter or even false laughter, or imitation of laughter. The writer Milan Kundera, he's written this book in the 80s called The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And he says in there that we've made a mistake because we call laughter an imitation of laughter by the same name. And I think that's quite interesting as a possible way of dividing these things, because my theory, and to finally answer your question, is that if we are only laughing at things we agree with, if we're laughing to confirm what we already know, like a kind of Dunning-Kruger effect, then that is the fake laughter, the imitation of laughter, and that it takes away the truly radical transformative capacity of laughter, which is the power of laughter to be transformative, to retroactively, eventally change the world that we're in. So is that a sort of summary? I felt like it was a bit long.
Yeah, that's even too much. Let's maybe come back a little bit, and I want to ask you, what is the theory of subject, psychoanalytic theory of subject that you adopt when you talk about comedy? And this is the place where you have to mention luck.
Lack.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that that's right. I mean the reason one of the reasons, and this could be maybe made more simply, one of the reasons why comedy, I think, can be radical, if you want to use that word, anti-capitalist, I would be more specific for my is that all laughter, when it's lack at the core of the subject. So I have always found the conceptions of the subject that developed through Freud and Jacques Lacan to be the most useful for understanding comedy. Some other people like Alenka Zupancic, who wrote this fantastic book, The Odd One In 2009, Anka Pavulescu, who's got a book called Laughter. These people have also tried and to sort of think about comedy this way, and I think this is the right way to think about it, because for me, laughter always has to do with revealing the failure, the void, the lack at the heart of subjectivity. And that makes it universalist. And here's another thing which I find fascinating about the way in which people understand, or I think misunderstand, comedy in general society today, is that people always think we're laughing at something, right? And in the service of something else. One of the main theories of laughter is what's often called theory of superiority. And it starts from Aristotle. It was most famously developed by Thomas Hobbes. And it's become, even contemporary writers like Simon Critchley, who we talked about, who might be part of your course, and other people have continued to use this as one type of laughter. But my view is that if it's superiority laughter, you're laughing at someone else to affirm how good yourself is. So, for example, you see someone fall over, and superiority theory would argue that you laugh because you wouldn't be so stupid as to fall over. That idiot does, and that means I get to feel superior to the other. For me, that is a completely capitalist form of laughter in this context, and it's not a Lacanian concept of laughter. And I also don't think it's correct. It doesn't seem true to me. If I see someone fall over and I laugh at them, I don't think that is what's happening there. I think there's something much more going on with how we relate to failure and perceiving it in others and in ourselves that laughter brings out. So this is why laughter can be attached to anxiety and stuff like that. But so there's lots to be said. I mean, laughter and anxiety was also one of my main topics. But for now, I'll just say that I think that those kind of theories of laughter, which go for superiority theory, um, uh, is to misunderstand how the subject actually relates to laughter. And I think that, and this is a good thing. Ultimately, when we truly laugh, when we truly lose ourselves in laughter, we confront something about subjectivity, including how fragile it is, how easy it is to fall and fail. And for that reason, I think laughter could be called a universal human, I don't know, feature or experience, because we all laugh, and I think we all ultimately laugh in this same way. What society, I think, tries to do is to repress that anxious proximity to subjectivity that comedy presents us with. So it's much more comforting to say, oh, look, that person's laughing because they think they're better than that person. For me, that's just not what comedy does. And I think it's, even when we're laughing, even when we might, if I make jokes about you, even if I'm laughing and pointing at you, there's a lot more going on there that brings us closer to the core of subjectivity and presents us with anxiety than simply, oh, one person thinks he's better or she's better than another. So yeah, I wanted to try and use an already existing idea of subjectivity, which I guess is sort of second nature to me after years of thinking that way. But I do think it's kind of impossible to understand this universal quality that laughter has without thinking of it as part of a concept of the subject as failed, or I guess one could connect that to a concept of negativity, a kind of gap or void or failure or lack at the core of the subject. And I think that, yeah, laughter presents us with this fact of this existence.
So laughter and comedy confronts us with the lack that is constitutive to the subject and psychoanalytic meaning of the word. And if this lack or nothing is something that we share, then the comedy has this power to create solidarity in a way.
Yeah.
I'm here.
I don't know if my internet or yours, but it slowed down a little bit at the end there. But working. Let me try to fix this. Are we back?
I'm back. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think it was my problem, so I just changed my internet. It sounds fine now though.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah, yeah, we're okay. Okay, yeah, great. No, if you just ask the last part again.
I was asking about this power of laughter and comedy to create solidarity, since it reveals us to lack, and this lack is something that we share, that we
Yes.
hold in common, then it has the power of creating solidarity through this.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly my point. And I would just add to it that the way it works for me, the way that comedy deals with lack and anxiety is by attempting to sort of cope with it by transforming it into something else. So, for example, if we're worried about we we might create different, we might be worried about one uh, aspect of life, and then we make jokes about it in order to deal with it or handle it or turn it into something else. So I think this is where jokes, for example, and laughter can be like racist, for example. People often say, well, what about like racist jokes? Um, and I think that and lots of the another thing which I think my view is different to people who've theorized comedy before is that I really don't like the sort of types, like categories of laughter, like saying even like so Todd McGowan has done this and Simon Critchley. They've both said that, well, there are some reactionary jokes and reactionary laughter, and there are some radical or liberal or liberatory or emancipatory jokes. Right now, I don't think this, and this is, I think, one of the most interesting things that I've tried to get to. I think that the the way that jokes can be racist, for example, or sexist, um, is precisely where their radicalism is found, because what they do is they approach lack or anxiety and then they twist it into something else. And that something else could be anything. It could be a racist something else or a but the fact that they get approach anxiety or approach lack and then turn away from it into something else, that is where we find the sort of radical core of laughter, or the, as you put it, I think better, the universalist core of laughter. So it's precisely in the way that laughter can bring us like closer to the unifying anxiety lack that we all possess, and then turn away from it so that we are able to see and confront this nature of this universal nature of subjectivity. So the one theorist of comedy to have said that is a French psychoanalyst called Charles Moron, and he wrote a whole book on laughter, comedy, and anxiety in the 60s, maybe exactly 1960. And he says that laughter is the renversement of anxiety. So laughter, like it's anxiety twisted into something else, or like it sort of reverses or twists anxiety into something else. And that something else can sometimes be sexism, racism, nationalism, whatever, but it doesn't prevent the fact that the function of the laugh, the comedy has been to do that process. And in fact, it might even intensify the visibility of that to us. So yeah, so my view is, as you put it, the interesting, important thing about comedy is that it contains a reminder of this universalist subjectivity that we all possess. And on top of that, I would say that even the worst jokes do that, have that, and perhaps especially the worst jokes.
So the one of the most amazing things and the most precious things about your discussion of comedy for me is this close proximity of comedy and anxiety, because I'm trying to develop negative theory of laughter, actually negative theory of everything, including laughter. And this works really well because at the same time, this guy, moron, whatever, and you.
It's moron.
So you both see the link with anxiety, but for him and for everyone else, except for you, actually, is that it's always a relief of anxiety in some form. But you also show that there is this trick that it at the same time it's either rather maybe promise of relief or a form of confrontations really relief, but most importantly, it also brings anxiety back. It's the way of dealing in anxiety within the space of anxiety. So it's not a relief. Relief may be something secondary or dialectically linked, but there is also anxiety there, maybe even more. It's like it tricks you through the promise of relief and tricks you into anxiety because you're confronting this lack that constitutes you as a subject, and this is traumatic and anxious.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree with that. And I was thinking what to say to you about the question of negativity in comedy, because for me, I one of the reasons why I object to some of the existing theories is that it seems to think of it as a positive thing. And so, yeah, as you say, even in Moron, it's like, or in Freud, it's like, well, this is a necessary. I mean, so it's a positively charged thing because it helps you to deal with anxiety or whatever. So that's something I haven't quite felt. I don't think it's like a good thing or something like that. It's not. It shouldn't be inflected positively or negatively. Maybe it's just that this is how subjects work. By continually, you can't approach anxiety itself, but you continually draw to it and then pull away and turn back, or you think you're getting further away from it, or you're building a fantasy. This is another way I tried to explore it. You're building a fantasy to deal with the original anxiety that we have. But that's not good or bad. It's just the fact that subjectivity does this. So I think, yeah, I'd be more likely to, like, yeah, I think that laughter laughter is always this reminder, when it's really a laughter, because I wouldn't want to, when people make a joke that they just agree with, like I was talking about before, and then everyone just goes, like that doesn't do it. Like, for example, lots of anti-Trump jokes, right? Lots of people telling anti-Trump jokes. These are just not funny, and it's almost like people are just pretending to laugh because they sort of feel like but that I would say it's not really laughter. But laughter, when it does in fact appear, it's always this kind of like marker of return to the core of subjectivity, anxiety, trauma, or whatever. So I do think it's silly to think of it in sort of positive or negative terms. And I also think it's silly to think of it as there's right-wing laughter and left-wing laughter, or emancipatory laughter, or there's cruel laughter and whatever, joyous laughter, whatever. These are not categories I don't think are very useful. It's just that laughter is, and it ties to the nature of subjectivity and operates as a constant reminder of how subjectivity is.
Mhm. Yeah, great. Thank you. The key point to your theory of comedy, probably, and the tricky part of it, is the doubleness of joke, doubleness of comedy. And it's complicated. It's like first part maybe of your book, you're trying to lure people in by kind of offering this distinction between the promise that there's going to be discussion between the bad capitalist laughter that surrender to capitalism and good revolutionary laughter that fosters solidarity. But and it's nice that way. But then you complicate things and you claim that there is this doubleness, um, basically subverting yourself and subverting this maybe simplistic idea, which is kind of attractive. But nonetheless, what you do, you show that the proximity between, and even now when you talk about didactic or fake jokes and true jokes or true humor, there is still something that you end up mixing them like together. There is some kind of close proximity, and they're both at the same time in a way. And that's why you claim that anti-racist jokes are very hard to distinguish from racist joke. And I think I'm new to the Western culture, but aren't you supposed to be cancelled for it?
Um, well, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, it can't be cancelled if it's correct. But I mean, it's not to say that racist jokes are a good thing or something like that. It's to point out that this aspect of laughter is happening whether you like it or not. And I think one thing that appeals to me is that when I if you laugh at something you completely agree with, I think it can still sometimes be funny and still have this effect. But when you're caught, that feeling where you're caught in laughter and you're almost unsettled that you've laughed, because you've been drawn in, and I think that some racist jokes are an easy example of this. Most people have an uncle who tells some stupid racist jokes at Christmas, and everyone says, "Oh, come on, Steve, stop this." But sometimes, occasionally, you catch yourself laughing at one of these. And this, I think, is a really important moment, because what it does is it shows you how you're the subject of ideology, right? It's not We're not pure individuals, and this is where I maybe trying to give a serious answer to your question about can you be cancelled, is because the whole of that sort of question of cancellation relies on the fact a kind of purity logic where there's the goodies and the baddies, or there's people who inherently deep down they've got the wrong thoughts and they deserve to be punished for them. And then that's what I also get phrases like crypto fascist and stuff like that, where someone's they've slipped up and now you can see that fundamentally there's something bad about that person. When you laugh at your uncle's joke at Christmas dinner, it is possible for your cousin, who's maybe 20 something female, to think, oh, Alfie's been caught out. He must deep down be as racist as Steve, something like that. But for me, it's not that at all. It's something much more powerful and anti-capitalist than that, which is that you see that you are not a pure subject who can exist outside of ideology. And the fact that you can be subject to the power of a joke and caught up in its process, it shows that you are a subject who can be caught up in the process of ideology. And actually, that argument is an extension of Mladen Dolar's argument, where he says that when you're laughing most freely is when you're most subject to ideology. So, and this is again, this would be a powerful anti-racist argument, because the power of racist jokes is not just that they reveal who's secretly racist at the Christmas table. It's they actually have a power to produce real existing racism, for example. Mm-hmm. Right. So I have to make those points if you want to be anti-racist about the joke. Do you see what I mean? It's sort of, it's by, and yeah, and then one last thing on that is the fact that you can laugh at something that you shouldn't laugh at also shows you that you're only human. You're a universal subject. There's no one who's above this. We're all subjects to ideology, and jokes can at least show us that, which to me would be a universalist, humanist realization. So I think that those things do happen, and it's good that they happen. Of course, I also think there are moments where the racists are doing the didactic laughter where they're just agreeing with themselves or something like that. But when it's truly funny and you're truly caught up in laughter, I think it's doing ideology, as Mladen Dolar says. But more than that, it's showing you that you're a subject of ideology, and maybe even undoing ideology or presenting you with something that can counter it.
Mm-hmm. It's like well, you have to confront the existing order, and being racist is kind of confronting it within you, which is the most genuine maybe way of confronting it. Not just, staying outside being a beautiful soul, pretending to laugh, not not through yourself, but revealing how you are racist, first of all. But also
but just very quickly on that, I think again you put it better than I did, but the answer to the question about cancelling and jokes and stuff is exactly the beautiful soul thing. It's if you accept that there's no beautiful souls, then you can't be cancelled for laughing at the wrong thing. And I think that's a better approach than the beautiful soul. But anyway, you carry on.
Well, it's also, for me, it's not only that it's anti-capitalist, and revolutionary. In this way, if you take into account this doubleness, it's so radically revolutionary that it's anti-revolutionary in a way. So it's both anti-capitalism and anti-revolutionary, and revolutionary in this way. Because if you divide into, capitalism into, and those who are trying to install revolution or something, there is whatever. So it's beyond kind of both. It reveals the doubleness in a way of the whole structure. The way how the structure is dialectical and the joke is not dialectical with Aufhebung. So it's revolutionary in a way against anti-revolutionary,
Yeah.
And it's funny in its own way.
No, exactly. I agree with that. And I think, this is getting to the, I mean, I sort of inevitably failed to kind of get to the kind of core point in writing about it, as always is the case. But I think that something strikes me badly wrong about calling laughter as a positive feature of life or whatever, as I said before, but equally about calling it emancipatory or revolutionary or radical. And these, when I start speaking about it and saying, well, yeah, but the radical thing about laughter is I already feel guilty for saying that, because it's not that, is it? It doesn't and this is the, yeah, as you're trying to do yourself, it's how is it caught in this cycle of subjectivity and fantasy, where it helps us to understand things. And I think that's how I would see it. I think that laughter is just a sort of unconscious analytical tool. It's neither emancipatory nor imprisoning. It's something that makes visible how the way things currently are. I think that's probably it. It's not, so it's neither good nor bad. It's just sort of a thing that I don't know. But it occurred to me slightly as a digression of what you said before. But when we were talking about the jokes and the race jokes and stuff, like, one of the really interesting things I always think is the question of, are there things you can't joke about or shouldn't joke about? And I didn't really, apart from talking about Ricky Gervais and Dave Chappelle, I didn't talk a great deal about the current sort of topic of transgender and its relationship to jokes. But what I did do was I did a little bit, and I talked to just a couple of my friends who are trans, and they both gave me the same answer, which was that by not including uh, trans people in the joke, you're almost monsterizing, excluding them from humanity, because to be included is the universal thing. So it seems to me that there's nothing worse than this idea that there's something or someone, especially when it comes to identity categories, there's someone that we shouldn't joke about. That seems to me like you're saying there's someone who isn't welcome within the human nature of society. Um, so that was just an interesting kind of like, and that was where I tried to connect that a bit to like a whole other tradition of theorizing laughter from the kind of Marxist side, which is like Bakhtin and concepts of carnival and things like that. Because I think there is an idea, like there's a history of laughter playing this role that like ensures that everyone is included in society. So as soon as you start creating things that you shouldn't joke about or that exist outside of this space of comedy, I think you therefore don't have a society. And just to say a kind of provocative thing, I do actually believe that you can't have society without laughter. So I don't think that if we press out laughter and do become a post-comedy society, I don't think that the future generations will be able to form society, because one needs piss taking, ribbing, roasting, joking, laughing, smirking, all of that stuff in order to have social connection. I think that's another sort of important thing I wanted to sort of say.
There might be different kind of laughter that this younger generation have that we are not have troubles understanding. You know, like self-mockery. Well, it's different. It's too complicated. We're too old. But but the question that is provocative to me, and this is something that I don't agree with you, which might be my problem, is that it feels like you're nostalgic for this trolling. Well, I partially agree with you, but partially I hate you for this being nostalgic. Maybe because you wasn't trolled enough, unlike I was trolled enough. So is this true that you feel nostalgic for the trolling? Well, I can help you
It's
with
a good
answering
question.
it.
Yeah, go on. I mean, I do have an answer, but you go on.
Well, I was thinking about it. If you're nostalgic, it's true. It's probably because you're perceiving it as this carnival Bakhtin style, that wherever we all admitting this lack in ourselves as failure, and the one who is trolling you is just showing you that. So if I would be nostalgic for something like it, and I was trolled like quite a lot because I'm trollable, and maybe I'm actually looking and provoking it and looking for a perfect type of troll that never came there, because trolls supposed to reveal this lack back in themselves. They can troll you, but they can only do it properly probably if they also would admit me punching them back, not through being superior, to be feeling superior to me, like they're trolling me, so they are not laughable themselves, only me. if both, and that's what best friends do, they just,
Yeah.
troll each other. So this poor perfect kind of troll never arrived. Maybe I would feel nostalgic for them, but those who were trolling me is like the opposite. It's they,
Mm.
even though they are really pathetic in doing it, but
I
but they
mean,
won't admit it.
yeah, no, I do find this a really interesting conversation, and I've tried to talk about trolling as well. And I did in the book try to analyze these different kinds of trolls, like those some of the right-wing memes and the people who pour milk everywhere, and then the vegans who pour milk in department stores. And I tried to look at, okay, what is a psychotic trolling, what's a neurotic trolling, and what's a perverse trolling, and I guess the neurotic trolling would be the ideal form. I've also been accused of trolling, by the way, on the internet, when I thought I was just doing a corrective joke. So I noticed someone saying something, and I thought, okay, I'll take the piss, make a joke, and um, it will be seen in the spirit of humor, but it will still provide this kind of corrective action, just as I would expect my friends to make a joke about me if I, reveal my foolishness or go down X or Y path too far. Um, and it was completely misunderstood as a really nasty trolling thing, which I hadn't intended it to be. But I suppose if I'm nostalgic for imaginary trolling of the past, it would be that these are like socially corrective teasing and joking, which allows society to start. And it starts in the playground with children younger than ours, where being laughed at. I remember as a child feeling enormously embarrassed and ashamed being laughed at by people, and then enormously guilty also for laughing at others. And what I think this is the correct part of the correct part of uh, young people learning where subjectivity functions between people, and how it connects with anxiety and later emotions, affects such as guilt and things like that. So I do think that those process, and for example, in the local secondary school here, it was in the news, a kid was expelled or suspended because they were like muttering something about Andrew Tate, or something like that. So they were trolling the teacher with some online content or whatever, and they were then suspended. And they said, well, jokes about this can't be permitted within the school. And you're seeing that. I've seen it in several times in recent years, that schools are interested in pressing out certain things that would previously have been there in a sort of free for all of um, children's behavior. And okay, I'm not saying we should all be bullied and stuff. But I am saying that I think we should be at least aware that the landscape is changing here, and I do think laughter and play are being policed probably in innovative and new ways. And I would have concerns for the future if we don't have open spaces for subjects to troll each other, if you like, and learn and progress through those experiences without being suspended from school or fired from their jobs.
Mm. Yeah, great. Well done. Let's see if it will help.
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, there has to be a line with like certain things, but like, yeah, I mean, I've always found it strange as well how comedians, some comedians have this view that comedy is the only sort of protected space. So they say, like, well, I wouldn't say this out in the real world, but as a comedian, I can and stuff. I do find that kind of interesting, but yeah, yeah, it's interesting. But I feel that I don't know. At the moment, I feel that these and maybe you're right in that when we look at the younger generation, we should maybe just admit that we don't understand this, and they'll find their own ways. And maybe the fact that we don't understand or we feel outside of it is a sign that something you know, something is happening rather than something isn't. But yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one, you know. Another completely different topic, which we're just touching on, I'm interested in, is like the question of like adulthood or puberty or whatever, and the question of like a generation kind of delaying or avoiding adulthood for like a mainly probably economic and material reasons, but these things that we've been talking about could also be like social reasons why um, people are not prepared or comfortable with the idea of becoming adults um, because they haven't gone through these processes that perhaps the previous generation did. I don't know. That might be a bit wild.
Maybe it's not necessary to go through those processes, and we just envy,
Yeah,
someone.
we just think it's normal because we did. Yeah, yeah.
My last question is, and it's not necessary to answer it, just wondering, no one, you don't write about it, not only you, but no one writes about it that much, even at all, about dark humor. If so, my question is whether dark humor needs a separate theory of
Mm.
humor. Simon Critchley touches upon it a little bit, and in a really non-dangerous way, he would claim something really dark that is beyond ethical, not beyond ethical, but not ethical. Simon Critchley would say that it anesthetizes, makes us numb to death, for example, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't. So I don't
Mm, mm.
really get how it's
Oh yeah,
both.
yeah.
But
I'm trying
maybe
to think. I'm trying. I just yeah. You reminded me of what when I did. The one time I did write about this was um the debate about Chaplin in Adorno and things like that. If I remember this rightly, this is quite some years ago, so apologies if this is like quite misremembered. But I forget who the other. But Adorno's theory is very much that Chaplin's um, performances of fascism operate to soften and sort of lighten, desensitize the so that probably is where the Critchley argument comes from. And I definitely had an argument against that. But I'm not sure if I can remember it. Yeah, yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, I also recall Zizek's discussion of the final scene of Chaplin's Great Dictator, where he replaces the fascist content with the sort of content of liberal democracy, and everyone responds in the same way. And so Zizek sort of points out that this illustrates how you know this way of thinking is a matter of form rather than content. And I think through that, I had the idea to sort of show that Chaplin's Chaplin's kind of comedy about fascism or fascist comedy was more in the was doing more to reveal the form of fascism than it was to desensitize us to the content of it. Um, but I mean, that is an important question, and that would help, I think, with the question of dark humor. And yeah, I do know that it's in like the last part. I did all that in the last part of my PhD, so I'll take a look. If we have any discussion with people, I'll think about that in advance.
I think it's too uncomfortable to go into this topic. Like, what do you think of it as the true humor or just false one? Because it's actually creepy. So I don't recommend to
Yeah,
going
yeah.
in. But at the same time, it's interesting. Right, maybe one more last question. What does comedy personally means to you, and why you are philosopher instead of whoever you are, instead of comedian, or maybe that's my thought, that philosophers are failed comedians because they came.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was going to be my answer. I think I would just fail if I tried to be a comedian. But
Which is even more funny, in a
yeah,
way.
I'm just not funny enough. But but It's an interesting question. I mean, my family always say, my wife says, and my mum used to say that, I would always like have comedy as a real defense against, I would always like make jokes and laugh a lot and make light of it as a real anxious defense thing. So it's kind of interesting that my theory of comedy like totally takes a different approach to that. Like it's almost like I'm defending myself, but with my theory, because I feel that comedy, um, as we said in the sort of first part of our discussion, I feel that it tends to bring you closer to anxiety than it does to get you away from it. Or at the very least, it can only do both. So it's interesting that personally, I seem to have this kind of like anxious defense mechanism, whereas I turn to jokes and comedy to try to sort of deal with things or whatever. But then, yeah, I don't
So your
know.
book, so your books on comedy are defense mechanism against your parents and family, just to show them that it's not defense mechanism.
Exactly, exactly. That's precisely it. But I don't watch in terms of what I enjoy and stuff. I don't really like stand-up comedy. I do find some amazing moments in it, but in general, I think it does tend to lean more toward. Anyway, I'm really interested in history of film and comedy on film, and also in um British TV comedy, and you can see these patterns by the way. I began by mentioning Yella Krecic, and she's I think her book is coming out in English, so people should really look at that. And she has done some really interesting stuff around, for example, looking at this goes back to our first question, but looking at, for example, um, the very first season of uh, the Sex and the City, for example, and of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which are 20 plus years old, and comparing them to the comedy in the latest two seasons. And she uses these TV examples to sort of try to illustrate that there is actually quite a change, not just in the jokes we're making, but in the form of comedy that we're experiencing over the last couple of decades. And yeah, to me, yeah, I mean, Bakhtin wrote once that it would be extremely interesting to write a history of laughter. He just says that as a phrase. Actually, it's taken from another writer called Alexander Herzen, who I think is a Russian writer, but I never read any of his stuff. But the reason why this is an interesting sentence, it would be extremely interesting to write a history of laughter, is because we like to believe that laughter is kind of ahistorical, right? And we when we if you go to an art gallery and you look at history of art, you see laughter depicted, and we tend to think of it as this kind of human response. People often think of it as natural or whatever, probably not in our world, but if you can start to think about historicizing laughter, it shows even our most, and this is a very basic psychoanalytic point, but even our most apparently instinctive human experiences are riven with their economic, material contexts, ideologies, or whatever. And I think that it would be extremely interesting to think about a history of laughter. And I guess I'm just using the last 20 years to try and do a super recent history of laughter, but it does have this implication for thinking about subjectivity and the assumptions we make about it, hopefully.
Mhm. Thank you, Alfie. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, it's really fun, really fun. And I was really happy to talk about this because I saw you posting about some of these ideas, and I thought, oh, I've got so much to say about that. But yeah, and if this is going to be part of a course, or there's going to be later parts of discussions or whatever, I'd be more than happy to take part in whatever bits you want. And it's great. Really
Thank you,
enjoyed it.
Alfie.
Or I really,
Great.
really
See
didn't
you.
enjoy it.
I'll see you soon, probably in real life,
Yeah,
and we'll
hopefully
get
very soon.
chance
Yeah,
to
so I better
discuss.
go and get my daughter, but lovely to be here. See you soon, Julie.
See you. Bye.
Bye.